Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's That's Mental, Mate. I'm joined this week with Johnny from Secure the Insecure podcast. Johnny is a showbiz journalist, and he started the Celeb Mental Health podcast, which talks to stars from all walks of life, such as Big Brother, Love Island, The Traitors, most recently, which I was happy to see, big fan. You've interviewed the likes of Dr. Alex George, Denise Welsh, Amber Rose, to name a few. How are you, mate?
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor. And thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. That means everything. And if you are a Traitors fan, Molly Pierce is on next week's episode. So make sure you check that out on Secure Insecure.
Very good. So we start the podcast every week asking each guest how they are within themselves.
I'm good at the moment. It's always interesting when you do a podcast like this and you talk about how you are in that moment because we know that you go through 1,000 emotions every single day. Do you know what, my friend? I'm doing okay. I'm doing all the right things at the moment. The journaling, the meditation, the taking time for myself. What I realized, which was really beneficial, is I joined the David Lloyd Club. And I've never been a Soho House member because they're too far away from me. And I've always like, oh, it's a bit poncy. It's really expensive. I joined the David Lloyd Club. It's the exact same price as Soho House. However, what I've noticed is what's been really beneficial and why I think I'm in quite a good place at the moment is that I've been going there every single day and every evening going to a spa. So rather than just sitting in front of the TV all night and lying down, I've been going to a spa and lying down there, so I'm around other people. And so, yes, I'm paying a lot of money, but it's getting a lot of use out of it. It's nice to be around other people. And, even when you go in there, there's the receptionist, they know who your name is. They know that you want a towel, and then you go to the spa and they have a spa host and they're all friendly. And, it's little things like that. There's little conversation that you don't get when you work from home. So at the moment, on the whole, I think I'm doing all the right things and I think I'm in quite a good place.
Very good. Do you maybe want to start by telling the listeners about your podcast? So, what made you want to start your podcast?
Well, it's really interesting because the podcast is coming up to 5 years. I don't know when it is. I think it's next week or the week after. It'll be 5 years since I started Secure Insecure. Before that, I was a showbiz journalist and I was working for a radio station and I was doing a lot of showbiz news. So whether it was showbiz hits on air or interviewing celebrities and going to red carpets, I was doing all that. And then I found that other people were doing it. And I was kind of getting sidelined a little bit, even though I had an official title, an official role, and I was on the books, and other people were not. They were just someone you would call up and say, "Do you want to do show business?" I was like, well, why? What am I doing that's wrong? At the same time, in my personal life, single, couldn't get a girlfriend. And also, all my friends are moving out, whether it was alone or with a partner. And I thought, okay, I'm ready to move out. And it kind of gets that moment, everyone's doing it. You're like, okay, I'm going to do it as well. And I couldn't get a mortgage. And being a freelancer, it's hell on earth to get a mortgage. And I finally got one. And I remember having this moment where they said to me, yeah, all good, we'll take your pay slips for the year. Have you got a contract? And that was always the issue why I could never get a mortgage. And I spoke to Emma Kenny, Dr. Emma Kenny, who's an amazing psychologist, amazing, 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 amazing woman. And she said to me, why don't you start a podcast? I said, what do you mean? What's that got to do? And she said, look, you've lost your self-identity. And my thing has always been interviewing celebrities. I've done it since I was 12 years old. I've been on the radio since I was 10 years old. And so it is all I know. And I've got all these contacts of celebrities, and I've got a studio, and I've got all the stuff there, but I've just not joined the dots. And so I started doing it. And I started with people that I know and people who were local to me in the community who had mental health problems. And then I started bringing some celebrities in. And then the first year it was a bit of a mixture of that. And then it got bigger, and then it got bigger, and then it got bigger. And it got to the point that publicists were saying to me, can we have your author on? Because I've got a Secure Insecure book club. So every couple of episodes, I'll interview an author about their novel and look at the mental health theme. So I'll look at the different kind of quotes from the book. And then obviously all the reality stars started coming on. So I got friendly with a lot of Love Islanders. And then over the years, I can now say I've had these people from Love Island. So, now I will say, for example, last year, to the 10th person that came out, I said, well, hold on, the first 9 people who left Love Island have already been on it. And to now have nearly 270 episodes to go, look, for every kind of category of radio, TV, media, I can say to you, here's 5 people who have been on it before, here's 5 examples, you should be on it. And also all the press that it gets. And getting press for a podcast is quite interesting because I get really paranoid about it. And I know I need to get the press. It's the marketing. I haven't got a budget for this podcast. It's just my little thing. And so I don't put any money towards it. And so the only real way to get marketing for it is to get press lines. And I'm a showbiz journalist and I'm a very good journalist and I'm a storyteller and I know how to get the story and I always get the press line. And so I'll get the press. I'm like, yeah, I've got this exclusive. And then I get really paranoid. And so I start talking to that celebrity going, right, this is the news line. This is what I'm going to send out. Here's the transcription. Are you okay with it? And I get really, really paranoid to make sure they're okay. It then makes the press and then I still get worried. And then it gets in situations sometimes where, let's say I've told the publicist that it's going to get this press, and then they're really happy because for them, they're getting the promo. But then the celebrity's not happy with the press, even though it's positive news line, but they still don't quite like it. And you go, oh my God, I'm the worst person ever. And then you're going, well, what are your values for the podcast? Well, it's to start talking about mental health because the mantra of it is it's okay to not be okay. And so I focus heavily on that. And I focus heavily on making sure that I've created a safe space. You know, we talk about childhood, we talk about conversations that don't happen anywhere else, especially for the Love Islanders who aren't used to a conversation which is actually about them rather than coming out the video and going, well, what do you think about that couple and that couple? And so you have to kind of work out what are your values. And, you know, for me, it's the mental health space, but it's also the celebrity space. And they cross over and it's just doing it in the right way so that everyone's accountable for what's happened. So that's how it started. And like I say, now 270 episodes later, I have a mixture of authors, novelists, celebrities, reality stars. Anyone who wants to come on and say it's okay to not be okay comes on, and I put 2 out a week, Mondays and Fridays, and it's a passion project. You know, I spend a lot of time doing it, whether it's the research, it's the editing, it's the recording, it's the sharing, it's getting the clips for social media, and you have to do it as a passion project because you know we know since COVID how many reality stars and influencers and celebrities have been given podcasts. You know, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of podcasts coming out every single week with another celebrity. And they will do it for a deal and they'll do it for the sponsorship and they'll get paid and it's a job. However, with a podcast like this that's been going for 5 years, I'd like to think that it's evolving, it's getting bigger and bigger all the time. I'm learning all the time still about conversations and how to handle them. But also it's something that will stand the test of time and that it will be 300 episodes around the corner and then it'll be 400 episodes, 500 episodes, and it will keep running because it's something for me, and I think it's always really important to have, like you've got with your podcast, it's a hobby for you because you have a job and you work for someone and you're accountable to that person, that manager of yours, and they're paying you. And it's never reflected on you. Whereas this is where I can go, at Johnny Seifert is all over social media. At Johnny Seifert, the logo is on a reality star's Instagram or TikTok account. At Johnny Seifert is in the Sun newspaper. And that, for me, goes, you know what you're doing. You know you can do the job. It's just not been the right time yet where you've been given that chance. But all of this is the groundwork for your CV to show you do extracurricular things. It's all about getting those air miles in to say one day, look, you're going to have your own chat show. And here's the experience behind it. And also here's all the people you know that can come onto it because they know they trust you, because they know you've been on it before and they know they're in a safe space.
And why do you think it's so important for the likes of celebrities to be coming on to your show and your and speaking about mental health and how it is okay not to be okay?
I think it's the fact that being vulnerable is still quite a scary idea. And we can never be too vulnerable. And I think when it comes to insecurities, we all have our insecurities and we've all got traumas and we've all got something that we're holding on from our past that's stopped us. Because when you were at primary school or when you were at secondary school, you were the same as everyone in your class. And then something happened. And when that something happened, you went on a different trajectory. And what it meant was that you had to take a step back and go, I'm traumatized by this thing. Now, with celebrities, with reality stars, they've got to be real. They've got to be honest with us because we're buying into them as their identity. We're buying into the brand. And what that therefore means is that they have to be accountable and they have to be vulnerable and they have to tell us the truth. And if something's made the press, they need to talk about it. Whereas if something happens to you or I or anyone that we know, you might tell your best friend, you might tell a parent, you might tell no one, you might tell a journal, you might just tell yourself. You might be paranoid about it and keep going over your head. But you don't need to be accountable because you don't need to answer to anyone. And I think that's why reality stars want to do a podcast like this, because they need that space to actually speak out and to put it on record and say, look, I could have given this exclusive to a newspaper and got paid, but I'd have been clickbaited in such a way that there'd have been a news line. However, I want to have the space to actually talk in words. Instagram doesn't convey that. On TikTok, it's all clipped up. It's very heavily edited. If you think about any of your favorite TikTokers, let's say a GK Barry, she was talking about it on her Saving Grace podcast last week, that it's, 10, 20 takes for every little video. Whereas this is when you do a podcast, it's given to someone else to edit. And when I'm editing my podcast, I'm only clearing up the the ands, the hesitations, the repetence of words gets cleared up. Apart from that, it's very much you in your own words, and you have approval of it editorially. So I'll give it to you if you want to listen to it beforehand to make sure you've said what you want to say and you're happy with it. Whereas when you're just free talking, you sometimes forget what you're saying because you're just running around with you. And I think that's why people want to do it. And also, it's got the gravitas. Like I said, the 270 names on it, the fact that you can go in the library and go, oh yeah, I've listened to this episode and this episode, I want to do it because I know that I was trusted. And going, also, I know that I'm in safe hands because I can see on your Instagram, I'd like to think, that I'm a safe pair of hands to be part of.
And is there any moments during your, how many episodes you say? Sorry,
270 or something like that.
270. Is there any moments during them podcasts you had a real wow moment?
Wows always happen when someone's so vulnerable that you both cry. Kieran Thompson from the Traitors, we had a moment and we cried, really cried. Anything like that where you take a step back, go, oh, I've connected to you. And, it's a very interesting space, the podcast landscape, because when I started doing it, it was all audio. And so I would be in a studio with someone and we would record with microphones and we'd look at each other, and that was that. And then you had that rapport that you could build up before and afterwards. Now, podcasts are either professionally done in a studio and it costs, 250, £300 for that intimacy, or you do it on Zoom, because we now know that podcasts aren't just a listenable feature. It's something that has to sit on Instagram and it has to sit on TikTok. And so you lose a little bit of that because on Zoom, as you know, we have, a 45-minute Zoom window and you've got, 40 seconds really to say hello. And then you probably want a minute to wrap up. Then you also want to do your intro and your conclusion to the episode. So if you get rid of those 5 minutes and the logging on and making sure the camera or the microphone's okay, you've only really got 35 minutes left. That's not a lot of time to actually get to know someone and be vulnerable. So when you have that on Zoom, where you're sitting on Zoom all the time, to have that connection is just incredible. So moments like that, and moments that make you think, Paul C. Bronson's a dear friend of mine from Celebs Dating Him Out at First Sight, and he always makes me think. And what I like to do is come away and go, I've learned something new because I've done my research. I know what I'm going to be asking. However, when you've taken that conversation in a completely different way, and then the Zoom's on that, you're going, I haven't even asked my first question yet. You're like, that was the interview. That was a standout because I've been given something different to what everyone else has done. And if you're someone, let's say you're plugging a book or a podcast or whatever you're promoting, you're going to be doing hundreds of these interviews and you're going to be saying the same thing over and over and over again. And what your job is to try and make it stand out and make it different. And it's why when you watch celebrities do junkets, let's say film stars, you only get given 5 minutes and they're hell on earth. And I won't do them anymore because when I used to do these film junkets, you've got 5 minutes, you go in, you're a bit nervous. You've got 100 people watching you. They say go, you go, and obviously you want to know what the film's about, and then you might ask a quirky question at the end, and it's why they're getting people like Sam Thompson to do it now, who, by the way, I've got to put it on record, I love Sam Thompson. He's a friend of mine. He's doing an amazing job on Hits Radio. He wouldn't have that job if he wasn't good enough for it, and he got a lot of stick for his interview with Timothy Chalamet the other day. I don't know why. I thought it was great. We got to see Sam's personality. They're there to make Sam look good, and Sam looked great. I don't understand it. However, in the wider context, it's that question of, should reality stars be presenters and do the job and whatever just because they're social media following? Should you have TikTokers going to all the red carpets? Now, personally, I'm a bit half-hearted. If I was invited as well, I wouldn't care as much. But I think that you've got to create this space for safety and being able to speak openly and to know that if you're doing a podcast, it's because you generally want to have that conversation and you actually want to give something. There's no point going on a podcast and saying one word. You've got to actually talk, and that's why it's really important.
And can I ask who your favorite guest was that you've had so far? And maybe even, it doesn't have to be the same person, a favorite story that you've released from a podcast?
I think anything that's had loads of press, because I know I've done a good job. So Scarlett Douglas was on I'm Step to Get Me Out of Here 2 years ago. I'm friends with her. I knew she was going in the jungle a couple of days before she went in. She came out the jungle. I think she got back to England on, let's say, the Wednesday, and the Saturday she came and did the podcast. So I had the first interview with her, maybe after the newspaper. And I got 6 news lines and 20 articles of press. I was like, this just blew up and went everywhere. I did one a couple of weeks ago with, and this is an interesting story. I did it with James Alexandru from EastEnders. He played Martin Fowler. And I said to him, would you ever go back to EastEnders? He said, funny enough, I've been back as a director. And it just went everywhere. It got 17 articles, and it was James Alexandru returns to EastEnders and Martin Fowler returns to EastEnders. And you're like, oh my God, I've done it. You can't plan for it. So I was like, that was good. I think it's always good. And when I know I've done a really good job is when the celebrity reposts it on their social media channels. So number one, they want the clips. Number two, they post it on their stories and even on their grid and want to collaborate. And you're like, that shows I've done a good job, because celebrities are very protective over their Instagram accounts. There's a lot of kudos to it. We know they can make, between 3 and 6 grand a post and maybe a grand to 2 grand a story. So they're very careful what they put on there. So when they have put something of yours on there, or they might put the link in their bio, you're like, wow, they really want to show it. Mars Nazaire from Made in Chelsea, who's on Dancing on Ice, does an amazing job of that. He always shares the podcast that we do together and clips up the bits that are important to him to showcase it so that people will go and listen to it. And I think that's always really important. And it's always a nice sign, because you put all this work into an episode, and then when the person doesn't show it, like, well, what was the point of doing it? I don't benefit from the numbers. How do they benefit from it? Because they've had to waste their time doing it. So what was the point? So that's always a really nice thing to happen.
And you mentioned there about different people asking them the same questions. How do you, because I know I'm kind of in the same boat too, because whenever you meet so many people, how do you differ from asking the same questions? And I suppose I could ask too, do you focus an episode on a certain theme, or is it kind of like their whole life, or can you sometimes break it up into a few episodes?
When I started, I thought, right, eating disorders, episode 1, depression, episode 2, anxiety, episode 3. But there's only an infinite amount of mental health things you can talk about. That, like I said, that evolved over time, and it was based on the guests that I was getting. So when I'm looking at the types of guests I want to get, it's dependent on their story. So, for example, this week, Katie Hill was on Blue Peter. She then became a success coach, and then she's on my podcast. So, half the conversation, I always go back to the beginning. I'll say, like, talk to me about your childhood. Talk to me what you were like at school, because that's where, like I said earlier on, that's where you get the beginning of the journey, and that's where you can take it in different paths. And then you go, right, let's say it's reality star. Why did you do Love Island? Or what was it about Love Island that you wanted to do that would give you the validation? And therefore you start talking about validation, and that's where the conversation goes in different webs. But Katie Hill, for example, I know very much that I would want to focus on the nostalgia of Blue Peter and CBBC, because that's how we connect, because I was watching it. And that's the thing, if I know a celebrity in a personal way, I will want to talk to them about how we know each other, because that's where you build those foundations. Then you talk to them about their career, and then you talk to them about, well, where did your mental health journey begin within that? So looking at XYZ, what was that moment that you started questioning your mental health? And that's why you are the way you are today. When you're talking to someone, let's say an author, about their book, you're going to want to reflect on why they became a writer, then about the book itself, but also what are the meanings behind the book? Because they've written it in a certain way. They've used characters to disguise who they are. So what does that say? And if it's a reality star, like I said about the Love Island journey of why you've done that show, but also what does it mean to be famous? Because you're chasing this fame, and you can't put a number on fame. And when we think about fame and we think about followers, if you've got, let's say, 1 million followers, you want 3 million followers. You've got 3 million followers, you want 10 million followers. There's never enough. And then you get disappointed when you don't get booked onto the next show, the next TV show. And you think you should be going on, let's say, Love Island. Then you should go on Celebs Go Dating, then Dancing on Ice, then another show and another show. And that doesn't actually happen. It's quite rare for you to go on to another show after Love Island, and especially to do 2 more after that. So that validation is really important, because I know a lot of reality stars who are like, I have no money. I live in Manchester. I keep coming down to London for events. What am I actually gaining from it? A lot of these reality stars pay 2 grand a month for PR. So in 3 months, they've paid 6 grand to go to a handful of events that have also cost them more than that. So let's say, that's cost them now 7 grand, a grand to go to the events. What is the worth of that? What, you've been packed once and that's enough for you? So there's a very interesting thing about validation. So treat everyone like a new person. My advice is, if you're doing a podcast, is write out your intro, write out your 4 bullet points, so 4 areas you want to focus on, and then write your conclusion and leave it at that. Let the conversation steer and listen. Listening is so important. Pick up on certain things that the guest has said that you can then expand on, because like I say, everything goes back to your childhood. Everything's a mental health trauma. So once you really intently listen, you'll be able to understand why they are the way they are. And that's how you'll get that golden conversation with that vulnerability, the realness, and then hopefully some tears.
You've said about vulnerability a few times there and how key it is for a podcast. If you were a celebrity, or if you were to turn the mic on yourself, do you think you would be happy to discuss your story on your podcast?
I don't think so. I'm a
No.
deflector. So I deflect on everyone else's problems. I tell my best friends, the inner secrets. I suppose there's a fear that the newspapers could ever write about me. I've got that. I'm a micro celebrity. I'm not a celebrity, but I've also got a public platform. I also think that when it comes to vulnerability, what would be gained by me telling my stories? Would anyone actually care? I think when you are not a celebrity and you've got a podcast and you don't have a following, it's always quite interesting, because you haven't got that free marketing that people are listening because it's you. The only reason people listen to the podcast is because it's a guest that they're interested in. And it might be that you found out about it through one guest and then you've carried on listening, you've clicked that subscribe button. But it's quite rare that you might subscribe to a podcast based on one episode that you want to carry on listening. It's usually because you either like the format or you like the host already. And because I'm not nobody, no one really knows who I am. So therefore, they're not buying into me, they're buying into the guest. So I wouldn't tell my stories. And also, it needs to be done in such a way that it's caveated. If I'm thinking about the guest that I've got, editorially, I'm thinking of legalities, I'm thinking of safety. So, for example, having a number for Samaritans, which is 116123, samaritans.org.uk, or talk to Frank if it's about alcohol, or the National Domestic Helpline if it's to do with domestic violence. If you're doing it about yourself, you're not going to be censoring yourself. And I think that's quite a dangerous thing to do, because you're not an expert. I'm not a doctor. I've got no qualifications. I've got a level 2 in counseling skills, mental health, but that doesn't mean that I can go away giving free advice. And that's where you have to be really careful.
And would you be comfortable if you were on the other end of the mic and it was yourself, that was someone like yourself that was interviewing you? Would you think that you would make yourself comfortable?
Depends who I'm talking to, depends where I am, depends what time of day it is, depends what mood I'm in. If you're getting me in the daytime, I may be, love. If you get me at nighttime, I'm going to be more quiet, using this indoor voice. And also, if you've got me in the studio, it depends what rapport you've got with me. I think it's the same for me and guests as well. You might misjudge it at times and you're being really loud and they want someone really quiet. And if you haven't got that rapport with someone, there's no trust, and you have to be able to build up that trust. And also, it's time and place. Just because I've given away, just let's say I've got an anecdote about me that's held me back. Why would I say it now? Why now? Is it affecting me, or is it in the background? And if it's in the background, how far is it in the background? Is it affecting my everyday life, that it's all consuming? Or is it the fact of, look, it's let's say a lesson that was learned and I've moved on from it. What value is it bringing it up again?
Very interesting, because obviously I've interviewed loads of my friends that have dealt with mental health issues. I've interviewed people that I know locally. I've interviewed some other, like some minor celebs, that kind of thing. But before Christmas, I actually did my own episode, because I felt like I can't start this. And people asked why I started this. And I said, oh, because I've struggled myself, and I brought myself into the limelight just before Christmas there, and I kind of sat and talked for an hour, and it was more like, it's interesting that you said, who's going to care and why would I bring this up? Because I kind of felt like that too, but it's like, if it helps one person, then it's worth it, isn't it?
Well, I think you have to think about as well in that context of, you know, when you think about um who your audience is, and if you're talking to your local friends and therefore your audience is quite small and it's quite known, you know that's staying within that circle because it's not got that reach. It's why some people will do, let's say, a podcast to themselves. They'll never put it out, but it's just a voice memo to themselves to listen back to, or you have a private TikTok account or a private Twitter account because it doesn't relate back to you. But I suppose also it's how much have you surrendered to society? How comfortable are you in yourself to be able to be that vulnerable? And so if you, let's say, are a big reality star and you've got a big following and you're putting it out there to say, I'm having a really hard time, you know you're accountable. You know that everyone's going to be watching it and listening to it and commenting on it. You've got to be comfortable to be in that position. Anything you say is on record. Anything I've said to you today, you've got control over. Anything that you do is out there in the social sphere forever. And so you've got to be really careful about what you do and what you don't say and how you censor yourself because only you can be accountable for you. You know, if you think about it from a journalist point of view, you want that scoop, you want that story, no matter what it is, you want it. And you want it because you then want to go away and go, look, I've won this award for the best scoop of the year because it furthers your career. I wouldn't be able to be a great journalist because I get too paranoid. I care too much what people think. However, I know a lot of journalists who I'm very, very good friends with who will do anything for a story. It's different ways of approaching it. So you've got to think about what's the aftermath, what's coming up next. Is it worth putting out a story if it's going to harm people? Is it worth really upsetting that celebrity for a scoop? If you're telling your personal story and it's within your friendship circle, there's a danger that you're going to feel you're more judged than if it went out to the people who had no idea who you are. And if you put a message out to people who don't know who you are, do you then want to invite loads of messages in? So if you're a big star, and let's say you've said something you've never said before, let's say, for argument's sake, person X has been abused and they've never spoken about it before. Do they want to open that channel that suddenly their Instagram explodes because people are DMing them saying, number one, I've done it, or number two, can I have advice? You know, sometimes we go through these traumas and it's happened and you want to move on and move on in your own way and not have to keep dealing with it and not have it in your face. I'm a blocker. So I deflect, but also if someone has annoyed me, I will block them on social media. Out of sight, out of mind is my attitude. And it might take me a week or 3 months or 6 months and I'll unblock them and then I'll carry on as if nothing had happened. But that's my way of doing it. Everyone's got different coping mechanisms and we don't know what everyone's are because everyone's got different boundaries. And so unless you know what someone's boundaries, which is why I do security in school, because I say it's okay to not be okay, you're not going to know why someone is the way they are. And therefore, you've just got to think about what is achieved by you telling that story. Because, yeah, look, we all want to help everyone. We all want to be fixers. But is it better to be a fixer one-on-one or rather than tell a whole group of people?
No, that's fair enough. Yeah, I understand. Very interesting. To speak to someone who's kind of doing something similar, obviously to a completely different scale, but very interesting. Like I'm kind of relating to you a good lot. I must ask about the novelist one. You said you do once a month with the with the author. I actually do write my own books as well, and a couple of them are actually about mental health. So I would love to even investigate that further.
Is that for you to be a guest or for you to do that yourself?
No, for to be a guest, if you would have me, obviously.
Absolutely, I'd love to. I'd absolutely love to. And I also think for you to do it for yourself as well. You know, authors all want to be published and all want to be promoted. And the hard thing with authors, and actually the episode of Secure and Secure that's coming out or will be out by the time this is probably out, is with C.L. Taylor. And she's an amazing author. Her following's, I think, just around 10,000 on Instagram. And we had this conversation on my podcast, Secure and Secure, in the book club, and we're talking about my different social media numbers and how someone like a Colleen Hoover's got 2 million followers, and then you've got really good authors who might have 4,000 followers. And so suddenly, yes, you're going to want to interview a Colleen Hoover and E.L. James or Harlan Coben or Richard Osman because they're so known and because of their following. But also you've got authors who've got a much smaller following, who've got amazing books, amazing messages about mental health, and yet they don't get seen. And then, you know, with authors as well, when you have a book out, a lot of the time, the reason why people know about it is because They've seen it in a bookshop at the airport. And the front cover looks quite fancy because they know they need a read for holiday and it's 99p and you take it with. I don't think most people are like me that number one will sit on Amazon and go through all the books and see what's coming up over the next 3 months, which I do each week. Also, I have my go-to authors. I read 50 books a year. So within that 50 books, if we take away, let's say, 15 memoirs, let's say 10 new books, that's 25, then you're left with 25 of your favorite authors who bring a new book out every single year. You know how they write and therefore you trust it. I find it really hard to get into a new author. I'm very lucky in a fortunate position that a lot of book publicists who promote the books know the types of books I like. And so they'll bring me the books that they know that I want that author, but also books they know that I'm going to like with an author that I haven't heard of. But if you're new to books and the book world, it's very hard to know who to have. But for you, for example, I would definitely say for you to start approaching publicists and going, I want to interview your authors, because I guarantee you they'll want to come on your podcast because they want the promotion of themselves.
And would you ever think about, because it's funny, I actually studied journalism as well. Would you ever think about writing your own book?
As a novel or as a memoir?
Either or.
Would I write? I'd be more tempted to write a novel than a memoir. But it's time and place, it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of sidestepping. And also you've got to take your foot off the gas. I'd love to be a counselor. I'd love to be a therapist. However, the years of studying, the money that goes towards the degree of that is a lot. And at the moment, I'm very content doing what I do in my everyday life. I'm horrifically busy. I haven't got time to take that on. I enjoy writing, something that I do at the end of the year. So on New Year's Eve, I never have any plans because I'm single, my friends are married with kids and blah, blah, blah. So New Year's Eve, I take the time to get some sushi with my family, and I'll come home to my flat and I get a nice hot chocolate cake with some custard, and I sit there and I've got my hot chocolate with my Baileys. And there's two things I do. The first thing is I write a letter to myself about the year. And it might be 4 pages, and I'll look at professionally, romantically, mentally, physically. I'll look at different areas that are important to me. And this is very personal to me, and do it for you based on what you find important. And I go through the mental health themes around it and how I've progressed. And I'll go through my diary and I'll set my diary. I'll go, well, in January, this happened. In February, March, April, May, June, July, etc. This is what happened. This is how I've grown, because everything happens for a reason. It is so important to go through relationship breakups. It's so important to be made redundant from a job, because otherwise you'll never be able to grow because you've plateaued. And so I do that. And then what I do is I think about my friends, and I think about those who have come into my life in that year, people who have gone that year, people who have stayed there, people who have been there for decades, people who have been there for a year. And what I do is, as I'm writing, I'll go, do you know what? I'm going to message that person. And I send about 15 to 20 voice notes of people that I know. And I'll voice note them all on New Year's Eve, and I'll send them a little voice note about the year and how we've gone through something together, or they've done something that's really inspired me. And I can't tell you how empowered I feel afterwards. I go to bed with such a smile on my face. I know I've made someone else feel good. And I know I've also made myself feel good, because, when you're in the midst of something, you're only thinking the worst. And it's only when you take a step back, go, that's why. If you think about those people who you argue with, and it starts getting very toxic, and you start defining them based on your arguments, you forget where you came from. You forget why you knew that person at the beginning. And so when you take a step back, go, right, you were arguing over, let's say, passion. You had the same goal, but you were coming at it from 2 different angles based on the journeys that you've been on. And that's where you go, okay, I'm going to take a step back. It's New Year's Eve. Now let me think. And that's where I go, right, there we go. I'm empowered now. So I would write that down as a novel, as a memoir, potentially one day. But I think I'm a better speaker than a writer. Unless I'm the only benefit of writing is you can push buttons, especially on social media. You can do an Instagram post and make it really, you're doing it for an effect to make everyone cry and feel sorry for you and get the likes. I quite enjoy doing that. The only problem is that, I don't want my mum or my family to see that. And so I have to be careful about what I do and what I don't put in the public, because I put everything out there, which is very dangerous at times.
I think I'm the opposite. I think I'm a better writer than I am a speaker. I'm get really tongue-tied very easily. You've probably noticed whenever I was speaking to you.
No, not at all. No, you're brilliant. But I think it's easier to write it down because you can reflect on it and come back to it. When you speak, you're just speaking. And, if you think about those people like Sir Terry Wogan, who chose every word carefully, there's that attitude versus the attitude that we're now in, which is like, I suppose, the influencer reality world, where you just verbal diarrhea and you might take 5 good words out of 20 words that you've just spoken.
And we end the podcast every week asking our guests. So if you can give any advice to someone that is going through a hard time, if you are having an awful day, what advice would you give to them that you do that makes yourself feel better?
Okay, so my advice would be 2 things. First of all, if you're going through something hard and you don't know how to compartmentalize it, what I suggest you do is call the Samaritans, 116123, the website samaritans.org.uk. We know the Samaritans for the posters on the bridges when people are thinking that they might want to take their lives. And we think of it only from a suicidal point of view. The Samaritans is a phone number that's available 24/7, and you can call them up. And what happens is you call them up and it says, "Hello, welcome to the Samaritans. Someone will be with you very soon. Stay there, stay safe, blah, blah, blah." If you're in an emergency, maybe call the police. And then someone picks up the phone and they say, "Hello, Samaritans." They don't ask your name. It's completely anonymous. You don't even know their name. And they say to you, "Why did you call today?" And you say, "I've called because this has happened." And they say, "Okay, well, how did that make you feel?" And then what they do is they don't take you on any tangents. What they do is they take a step back and they let you breathe and they let you think and they let you go, "Okay, let me organize my thoughts. Let me put out there why this is affecting me." The most recent example I had was 2 Decembers ago. I called them. And it was because my 3 best friends were getting married and they all had their stag do's. And my job was really insecure, and I knew I was about to lose loads of work, and I didn't know what was going on with money, and I didn't want to upset them because they're my best friends, and they've all got abroad weddings, and all their weddings are costing a lot of money already to attend, and then the stag do on top of that, and then I also need to live, and I also need to have a holiday for myself. And I spoke to the Samaritans, and they were like, "Well, what would they say about you going on holiday?" I said, "Well, they're also going on holidays and they've also got their own issues to deal with." And they said, "Right, there you go." And so that helped me organize my thoughts. The other thing to do is when you're having an argument, if you're having a bad day because you've had an argument or your boss has shouted at you, think of it from the other side. What's the other person trying to say? And this is where journaling is really important. So what you will do is write down, "This is what happened to me. I had an argument with this person because of this." And then flip it around to the positive. So is it that other person is having pressure on themselves? Is it they lashed out on you and you were the punch bag because of something that's going on internally with them? Is it the fact that they're insecure and they're putting their insecurities on you because they need to feel that they've been heard? Is it the fact that they are going through something else and weirdly you've ended up in the crossfire? And is it even about you? Because 99% of the time, it's not actually about you. It's the circumstance. It's the environment. And they're taking it out on you. And it's maybe down to jealousy. And it's maybe down to the fact that they've let themselves down, that they're taking it out on you. And that's why I think journaling is really important. So you've got Samaritans, you've got journaling. And I'm going to give you a third one. There's a podcast called Sleep Cove. And the Sleep Cove podcast is with a guy called Christopher Fritton. And it's available on Spotify. And I listen to this podcast every single night without fail before I go to bed. Whether I'm on holiday, whether I'm in a really happy mood, whether I'm sad, I always put it on. And he releases 2 or 3 episodes a week. And there's an episode for everything. So sometimes this is a bedtime story. Sometimes there's an episode about confidence or identity or self-love. And what I will do is go through all the podcast episodes and find one that resonates with me in that moment. So, for example, last night, I'm feeling fine at the moment. I listened to an episode all about getting to sleep quickly. But if I'm going through something bad, I'll put a different one on and he'll speak to you and you might do some counting, you might do some breathing. And then he puts on some music and you fall asleep. And I always fall asleep to it. There's not a single night I've never fallen asleep to it. And now I can't sleep unless I've listened to that podcast. It's amazing. And it's made so that you do fall asleep to it. There are hours, 2 hours, 5 hours long. And it's not a Joe Rogan. It is so you fall asleep to it. So meditation is really important. Samaritans is really important to have someone to talk to if you feel like you're alone. And journaling just to get your thoughts out there.
That's great. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on and speak with me. This was a very fun podcast for myself because, like I said, I can resonate with a lot that you're saying. Got a bit of pointers as well.
Well, I hope so. Look, I love inspiring the next generation. I love talking about what I do because, a lot of the time, no one says well done to you. No one is telling you that you're doing a good job. And it's only when you do things like this, or I go around talking in schools, that you go, do you know how much I've achieved? Do you know how far I've come along? And that's where you go, okay, this is why I know my stuff. I've been in the industry for 10 years. I've been working towards it for 20 years. I'm only 31. I feel like I'm always trying to catch up with a Roman Kemp or a reality star. And actually, I'm fine. I'm on my own journey. I'm doing great. Jane McDonald didn't start getting famous till she was in her 50s. And you just need to take your time and just remember that you're your own person and not try and be the other person. And that's why it's important to do podcasts like this, where you can learn little things and take them to your own life. So you might now go and interview a novelist next week. You might change the way you look at a podcast episode that you're about to record. And that's because of the advice that I've hopefully given you and inspired you. And that's the thing about just keep being around people who inspire you because, as everyone goes on their own life journeys, you're not at school anymore. And, you have friends who start getting married and have kids and you compare yourself to them, but then they're comparing themselves to you because for you saying that they're so lucky to have a kid and to be married, they're looking and going, oh, you don't have to have these arguments, or look, you can have your independence in golf when you want. And, look, you can go on holiday alone and sleep, whereas I have to go on holiday and I'm awake the whole time with the kids. The grass is always greener for every single person on the other side. So just keep surrounding yourselves with inspiring people who mean something to you rather than the people who are quite toxic, who bring you down, because that's the worst feeling to have.
Definitely. Thank you very much. And definitely keep me in mind for the next novel podcast that you have.
Absolutely, my friend.
I'd love to come on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out. How did you find out about Secure and Scared, by the way?
Through Instagram.
Amazing.
I think it was actually Kieran from the Traitors. I think it was maybe his story. I think I seen it and clicked on and started following, started listening to a few episodes then. Yeah, a few.
Oh, amazing. I'm really grateful. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And thank you for reaching out and thank you for letting me speak. And I hope this was useful to you. I know I just ramble, but it's because I don't get out much and no one ever wants to talk to me. So I've got a lot to say, but nowhere to say it. I have got my own podcast, but
Better too much to say than too little to say on podcasts.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Anyone negatively affected by this week's episode, there are a number of links in the bio to help. That's all from me. I will see you next week on That's Mental Mate.